This is a Panasonic Q GameCube, and today we're going to take it apart. Now this one in particular does not work at this time. I'm going to be taking it apart, breaking it all the way down, and then I'm going to go back through and see what I can figure out as I go forward. This is kind of a project system for me. I got it pretty cheap at a good price because the original person was mostly selling it as parts, and I figured, hey, it'll work really well to do a video where we can actually take a look at what is considered by some collectors as like the holy grail of their collection. And you might be wondering what makes this system so special. Well, this is actually a GameCube made by Panasonic with a DVD player included. It's a very odd system, and it was released in Japan only a few months after the GameCube that we know of now was released in Japan. That one was in September, this one was in December, only a few months later. Only less than 100,000 of these sold, and it was kind of expensive, about 41,000 yen, that's about what, 370 US dollars. Consider this, the GameCube was $200 when it came out, and Nintendo was pretty much trying to go for the price rather than all of the features like multimedia with DVDs, for example, that the PlayStation 2 and the Xbox were leveraging and being $100 more. So the GameCube came out as a game console first and pretty much only, and unfortunately for Nintendo, it didn't work out as much as they were hoping. Now, a lot of that could have to do with the PS2 leveraging DVD playback and being this all-in-one multimedia device and coming out about a year and a half earlier in Japan overall than the GameCube. But here's a system with the GameCube functionality and a DVD player included as well. You figure it would have actually done pretty well. On top of that, this is actually a pretty good DVD player. It had much more functionality than the PS2 DVD player, which was kind of tacked on, not necessarily as an afterthought, but it wasn't a DVD player first. This actually has quite a few ports on the back that will do things like let you hook up your subwoofer independently, just as an example, and the PS2 didn't have all of those features. However, this still did not do well, and you might even be wondering right now, how in the world did Panasonic even have the ability to create a GameCube of their own? Because this was Panasonic making it. It's technically called the Panasonic Q. Well, the GameCube actually uses its own media disc, right? It uses its own mini DVD, as we like to call it. However, that was created with Panasonic and Nintendo working together, and it seems that part of the deal was that Panasonic would be allowed to create their own system with GameCube hardware. And here's the Panasonic Q. Now, the Panasonic Q itself is pretty interesting. It actually is metal on the outside. It has a full LCD display up here, several buttons at the top for DVD functionality and playback, retains the 4 GameCube ports on the front that will actually light up blue, which is pretty neat. Several buttons if you want to enter game mode, for example, play with the surround sound, yeah, it had full surround sound, or just turn on specifically DVD player, because there are actually 2 devices packed in this chassis, and it's gonna be interesting to show you guys what I'm talking about and how Panasonic actually accomplished all of this. It's a very odd system inside. In fact, no one really likes to open these, and that could have a lot to do with the price of this thing, which can go upwards of $1,000 complete in good working order and functionality. If you have the box, I've seen some on eBay as much as $3,000. Broken, these are about $400 around, depending on what's wrong with it. So you can kind of see why people don't like opening these just because of the price. Well, it gets worse. This is one of the worst systems I've ever had to open. It is, I guess you would call it, a nightmare system to repair. So let's actually start opening this guy up now that we've talked about it a bit. And considering it was discontinued only 2 years later, and there's less than 100,000 units out there, I guess I can see why there's not a lot of teardowns online. Now, I've taken this one apart a couple of times, and I put it back together somewhat. I didn't put all of the screws back in because there are an insane amount of screws in this thing. But what's interesting about the way Panasonic put this together is it actually all relies on this back plate. Now, the back, of course, you can see several ports back here, still retains that digital out that the first edition mostly GameCube had, and that's how we use the Eon adapter, which, by the way, if you have one of these, the Eon adapter will work. You just have to kind of cut off that AV looking part that's just there for support. Basically, as long as it can plug into this port, it will work. So there you go, you can still get kind of that nice HDMI out for it. And you basically have to unscrew everything on the back. That's what holds all of this up. It's essentially in layers. So there are several different layers. For example, the DVD reader is at the top here as its own system. Below that is the power supply that will actually divvy up power to the top, which is the DVD, and then to the bottom, which is the GameCube. There's an entire GameCube board at the bottom here. Also, it has its own built-in power supply. You don't need a brick. So a lot of stuff here that Panasonic actually did to make this kind of valuable when it comes to functionality and what comes with it. So while it didn't do well overall, it actually had some pretty cool features to it and was fairly convenient overall. Now, the metal doors only have a few screws on the sides, and then they will actually lift out. And they basically are their own little doors on each side, just actual metal, which is, again, pretty funny to see that. And you can kind of see right away just the amount of stuff going on in here and why some people might be able to take these sides off because there's only 4 screws. But I have a feeling they get to this point and then they go, nope, closing it back up, because it can get pretty dicey inside. There's the other part here, which is mostly a board devoted for AV on the back here and also running power to other parts of the system. Okay, so all the screws are off the back now, and the back will lift out. It does act like a shelf because there are several notches here that all of this stuff will basically slide down into, and then it all screws into the back. Seriously, they're like probably, I'd say 15 or 16 screws that go through the back, and the idea is to hold all of the shelves up and support them. Without this, it all kind of slumps down and can be kind of annoying when it comes to testing, as stuff can short on things below it. It really is frustrating to work on, to be honest. But when you get that guy out, your digital port is just plugged in. There's actually a cable behind it through a ribbon cable rather than have it attached to the board or anything. Maybe that was easier in development, not sure. The top part is interesting because it does have cables that run from the top to the drive and then down to the board. Everything kind of runs up to the next point, and it's really hard to work with. I'll say that. So the top here will actually unplug, and we can start to actually break this guy down by layer, essentially, okay? So we're actually gonna start doing that now. We have other cables on the back here for the lid that will pop off. Ribbon cable here, and at that point the top is free. So this is actually our lid here. We'll actually switch to the top view so you can see it. This is our lid here, and I guess we'll just kind of go through each layer as we go. Has our LCD at the top here, and this will display things like DVD, GameCube, opening, closing, DVD, surround, all of that. And you have all of your little buttons here for stop, pause, fast forward, skip, all of that. And it actually works off of its own board. Now, when I was doing some testing earlier, I noticed that this wasn't insulated at all, and I believe whenever I'd move it too much, it would touch the top of the DVD tray, so I went ahead and just insulated it completely while I was testing so that I didn't have to worry about it. This actually worked pretty well just by putting some Kapton tape on there temporarily just for that. You can also get other plastic bits that will kind of shape to it you can cut, and that'll keep it from shorting. But that's essentially how the top works there, and you'll have DVD communication, and then you'll have power and other board communication on the side here as well. And this is kind of like, there's several different motherboards in this system. This is like basically the command center at the top for where you do input and everything, and where it displays what's happening. Now there are a couple screws here that hold the DVD CD portion in that has to come out, and that's basically how they have that held in. Let me go ahead and get these guys out real quick, and we can actually remove the next layer. However, in order to get to that point, we're actually going to start working on the front. So the front's going to actually pop out here, and because we already unplugged the top, all we need to do is unplug the next side. And what this is for our GameCube ports. It has full GameCube ports. They will light up blue, which is really, really cool. And then you have several other buttons. Open, close, surround, base, plus, game mode, which you can turn that on just by pressing that. It'll go right to the GameCube and bypass the DVD completely. Dialogue enhancer, cinema, game reset, and then just power in general for it. And this was really cool. I loved the blue accent that they did around it. The LCD will also light up blue. I loved the 4 ports having like this blue color. I think that's great. A lot of people will even try to add different colors to their controller ports for things like the original Xbox and stuff. I remember that. So that was a really neat touch to kind of have this blue outline around it. You can't see it obviously unless it's on, but pretty cool feature nonetheless. Now we can start taking a look at our DVD CD section. As we've done a lot of work there are a ton of cables still on the front here to unplug. This one, for example, actually comes from the GameCube. It's this very large one here. That comes directly from below, which I will show you soon. And then we have several other cables here that also have to unplug. And finally, our CD DVD section is free. And this is a disaster for most. Having to work with this CD DVD is not fun. There are so many things that can go wrong with this thing. This one, for example, has a broken rail, and that is very common. In order to repair this came off too. In order to repair this though, you have to get this whole thing replaced. Now, fortunately, you can 3D print them at this time. So there are full schematics online. You can also order them from people who 3D print them. And that's fine, but it was still frustrating. There's also a band in here that goes bad and you have to replace that. Basically, it's just a rubber band. However, people make quite a bit of money, I would assume, selling those online. Not just for this, by the way, for like pretty much anything with a full tray loaded system. Xbox 360s, for example, has its own board and then another board. You can kind of see where we're working into, and it's easy to take this apart. It's when you have to kind of go backwards, plug all of these cables back in while sitting it down and then having the front go on. And I'll tell you now, we're just getting started. So here's a nice top-down view, and let me know what you would think if someone handed you this and said, hey, this has to go back together. Look at the nice bunch of cables down here. It is something else. Now, I also did some insulating here because I was doing some testing, and this is part of the power delivery system for getting power around, and it's also straight up connected. So some of this stuff you can't actually remove without removing other boards, and we're gonna start actually doing that now. So this is part of the power supply. This actually is a board that works to redistribute, especially when it comes to the AV portion on the side there that we were just taking a look at. Let me unclip this guy. And this is actually fully soldered in on this side, and you really can't do much to get it out. It is like straight up soldered for the most part. So we're gonna have to work with that kind of staying next to it, okay? And in order to get this guy off, we're gonna have to also take the main power supply off. So we have a board here that works to redistribute power down to this guy that also works to distribute power down to the GameCube, which is right here. So it comes down here, GameCube is here. And then we have other parts, including down to here through a fuse board that's down there, and then it also comes out to here for the AV, and of course the disk drive at the top, along with our lid. So you're following along here, right? And you can again see why we're kind of losing some people and why some people don't want to get this guy apart. But now we have to actually start removing stuff in bunches because it's all already soldered together. Now, we can start to remove some cables. For example, this guy here that will detach it completely, for the most part, from the GameCube below. Okay, so we have now removed basically our power supply, our AV board on the side here. This actually, as you can see, distributes video and signal as well as our audio, right? We have our little optical down here as well. Subwoofer, plug, S-video. We have our composite, and then our different sound channels here. This would work to actually distribute to our GameCube at the bottom. We also have our main power supply here, and then our power delivery system here. And that is basically what powers your Panasonic Q if you have one, this large bundle of boards and cables. And of course we have all of our ribbon cables that go all over the place as well. And not the most intuitive system, but again, they were trying to work with both a DVD player and a GameCube all in one. So good news. We're almost to the GameCube. We haven't even looked at the GameCube motherboard yet, but we're about to get there. So this is actually the cable that would run up to our DVD CD drive, and I had shown you that earlier that plugged in. It's actually slot loading just plugs in there. We have our fan here. The fan that was originally in this guy was completely shattered and destroyed, so I actually managed to find a fractal fan that worked with it, which is cool. It did work fine. I've been able to get this guy to power on, but again, it's shorting when it's all together. However, when I have it broken down out of the case and everything, it's not shorting. So I do think I will eventually be able to fix this system overall, which is good news. But yeah, I actually found a 50 millimeter fractal fan that had the same voltage and everything, and it worked fine there. There's our cable for our digital out. We have our cable that was set up for the GameCube when it came to power and audio and video over there. And here we are. Now we're finally down to our GameCube, and we have to essentially take apart a couple of screws here, and this whole part will lift up. Okay, so we got the screws out there around the sides, then on the front, this guy will lift up, and we can see our heatsink here. It's designed so that air will flow completely through these fins. You can see there's holes here. The fan would be right here, and there's holes there. The fan just pushes air through, and then you get it expelled out the other side. I was trying to see if it was pulling air out. It did not appear to be. It appeared to be pushing air through. And then we have our fin here at the top for where the air would run through. So if I put this here, we actually have our fuse board down here. And I'm not even kidding when I'm about to say this. That could possibly be the issue for the F76 error, because there are fuses on this board that can actually affect it, as well as capacitors. So in order to fix that F76 error in your Panasonic Q, you may have to get all the way down to this point. I wish I could tell you there was an easier way to get here. Everything you've seen that would be necessary to get to this board, and that is a real pain, obviously. But again, we are now at our GameCube board. Few screws out of this guy, and we'll be able to look at the flipper and gecko chips that I've shown you before in GameCube, in the GameCube video I did where we tore one down. It is a little different. This board isn't exactly the same. You can obviously see it has a port there for the digital out, right? Whereas before that would have been, I believe, part of the board. But it also, of course, has different ports on the bottom for, we just talked about that fuse board. This will work. The Panasonic Q will still work with a Game Boy player that they designed specifically for it. It still retains all of those ports, but it has to be changed up a little bit because I believe the legs are a different size and everything, so they get kind of in the way. And we'll get this guy off. Very large pad actually on the bottom, but we have our chips once I get this guy off. All right, and there we are. There is our flipper GPU right there from ATI, which is great. Have our IBM CPU down there as well, some RAM chips, and overall, it's still a very small board, similar to what we're used to in a regular GameCube. Slightly different from what I'm seeing here, but overall, it's the same concept, the same idea, GPU, CPU, and everything else. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the Panasonic Q GameCube. One of the rare pieces that you can have in your collection, but also one of the worst pieces you can have in your collection if you ever have to take it apart. It's not fun. Panasonic made an overly complicated system, but I guess with what they were working with, which was a DVD player and a GameCube all-in-one, I guess they did the best that they could, I guess. Let me know what you guys think about the Panasonic Q for GameCube, and what you think about having to take it apart. Not one I would start with if you want to play around with this system, but let me know what you guys think down below nonetheless. Make sure you guys like the video if you liked it, dislike it if not. Make sure you're subscribed if you enjoy these kind of teardowns and looks at apparently rare systems now too, and you can learn a bit more about them, as I like to do these quite a bit, especially on the weekends. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.